Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 198, a summary of the end times, Level 1, Part 1. The podcast objectives are address 3 ministry housekeeping items and provide a summary of the first 8 podcasts in this end time series. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. Ministry housekeeping. Now, before I proceed with a summary of the 100 level courses in this end time series, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to address. Therefore, the leading frame of this podcast will have a more transactional feel as I work to ensure you know exactly where we are headed from here. First things first, I will be summarizing 8 podcasts in this lesson, and thus this podcast will take more time to cover. The same goes for the next and final podcast in this 2-part summary. For that reason, this is the only podcast I will be posting this week. So feel free to listen to it in segments as your schedule allows, and feel free to listen to it multiple times. Next, the assignments going forward will be directed towards those in this ministry, and they will be communicated via our email list. Therefore, if you have been following our podcast or our videos on our website or on YouTube, and you have not subscribed to our mailing list, it is important that you do so before we move on to the next series. Here is why. The assignments will be centered on the steps we must take to successfully navigate the difficult days ahead. These will include individual steps we must take at the personal level and group steps at the corporate level. This is why it is important for you, if the Father has called you to this ministry, to join our mailing list. Otherwise, you will fall behind. And due to the sensitive nature of time in these last days, you will not be able to catch up. Therefore, if the Spirit is leading you, I invite you to sign up today at transformationbytruth.com and stay ready, for soon there will be no time to get ready. Ho, today is a day of preparation, and the evening sun is sinking low. Last but not least, the Spirit is leading me to reiterate a critical aspect of the 100 level courses we have just completed. I ask you to remember this as we progress this end time series. The sum of these first 24 podcasts is the foundation for understanding end times. Therefore, you will struggle to understand and receive the revelations and truth I will share in future podcasts if you have not understood and received what I have shared in these leading 24. For this cause, if you have not understood and received what I have shared thus far in this end time series, or if you have questions concerning any of the material, be advised. You will stumble at some point in this series because you did not establish a sure foundation. You are not ready to move forward. And if this is the case, you have nothing to be ashamed of. Truly, I shared a terrific amount of information in these leading podcasts. And the warning I have given is not punitive. I am simply trying to ensure you succeed, for I am invested in your success. Why else would I invest all this time creating these podcasts? Now, in making this avowal, I would also state that it takes a spiritually disciplined mind to follow all the data points in this first level of courses. And yet, this is to be expected, for laying the foundation and building the framework are often the most tedious and non-eventful phases of any enterprise. Believe me, I heard it. Some of you reached out to me directly, asking me when I would address specific prophecies and share revelations. And some of you suggested that we were getting off to a slow start in the beginning. Like I said before, this was to be expected. Trust me, it's very similar to building a house. In the first few months, it feels like nothing is happening because, again, there is nothing exciting about laying a foundation. Yet, once the foundation is laid, you can create the framework. This is where things start to become a little exciting because now your home is taking shape. You are beginning to see something above the ground. My dear friends, that's exactly where we are. And believe me, that is exactly where we want to be. It took some time to get here, but we are here, right where the Father wants us, with a foundation and a framework to understand every line of prophecy concerning these last days. I will leave you with this example in concluding this section. The primary revelation we uncovered in level 1 is the fallacy of the rapture theory. And yet, we didn't fully address the rapture theory until the midpoint of this phase, i.e., podcast 12. I have a question for those of you who came to see that the rapture theory is a false doctrine as a result of my exposition. The question: would you have come to this conclusion if I came out in my first podcast saying, the rapture is false, the rapture is false, the rapture is false? Or allow me to ask the question this way: was it easier for you to see how the rapture theory is false because I invested the time showing you why it is false, as opposed to simply telling you it is false? Trust me, I know my audience. I am not speaking to small children. And as I have said from the beginning, I don't want you to take my word for it. This is something the Spirit must reveal to you. This is a critical matter you must know for yourself. My dear friends, you need to move beyond knowing what you believe, and you must come to understand why these matters are true. And the time I invest making and presenting spiritual and scriptural cases is not for me. My dear friends, it is for you. End Times Series, Level 1 Summary. Podcast 1, End Time Series, Welcome. Now, there are three key takeaways from podcast one. One, the scriptures refer to the days we are living in as the last time, and thus we should be living our lives with a terrific sense of urgency. Two, understanding end times is salvation critical. And three, Elohim has made me a watchman in these last days. Now, as it pertains to the urgency of the hour, we understand the day of salvation is coming to an end. Elohim is presently sealing his chosen elect. And once these all have been sealed, the opportunity to be saved will have come and gone. The door will be closed. For that reason, understanding end times is salvation critical. For how can you be saved if you don't know the parameters of your salvation? More perfectly, how can you be saved if you ignore the time you have been given and exhausted the day of salvation? Now, our loving master and the greatest prophet per his testimony both proclaimed, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. This proclamation not only reveals the kingdom has come near, it also denotes the following. Access to the kingdom of heaven is indeed obtainable, but for a limited time only, at the universal and at the personal level. And the easiest way to succeed both the universal and the personal level is by understanding the end times. Therefore, if you are of the persuasion that salvation is critical and everlasting life is a better option than endless death, then you must concede. Understanding the end times is salvation critical. This speaks to the third key takeaway. That is, Elohim has called me and others like me to be watchmen within the renewed nation of Israel. As a watchman, my role is not limited to warning the people of the evil that is coming. This is just the first half of my commission. The second and weightier half is guiding his chosen elect to safety by successfully navigating the way of escape. We are preparing ourselves even now to enter the renewed promised land. And very soon, the final exodus will begin. And thus, I admonish you again to stay ready, because once the call goes out, there will be no time to get ready. Podcast 2, as in the days of Noah. Now, here are the key takeaways from podcast 2. 1, the call to save yourself is a call to action. 2, as in the days of Noah, we will be saved by building an ark. And 3, the ark is the focal sign confirming those who are being led by the Spirit in these last days. Per the first point, the call to save yourself was made at the beginning of the end times, and it continues unto this day. It rings loud, clear, and true, proving that no one can save you but you. Here is why. Although we are not saved by works alone, works are a key component of our salvation. And the most prominent and pervasive of these works is our obedient faith in the Father's will. James 2:19-20. You believe that Elohim is one. You do well. The demons also believe and shudder. But do you wish to know, O foolish man, that faith without the works is dead? Thus, we conclude, if we believe these are the last days, and we have been commanded to save ourselves from this untoward generation, then there will be some work involved. Your faith alone will not save you. This speaks to the second key takeaway. That is, the primary work we must accomplish to be saved in these last days is building an ark. For it has been written, and as the days of Noah, so also shall the coming of the Son of Adam be. Matthew 24, 38 through 39. For as they were in the days before the flood, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark. And they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also shall the coming of the Son of Adam be. Now, by definition, an ark is anything that has been formed and ordained to guard the children of Elohim, specifically in those situations when evil is about to break forth and destroy all who are outside of the Father's will. Now, on this wise, the ark that I build may be different than the ark you built. However, each ark will have one critical factor that will guarantee it will deliver those who are in it. Vis-a-vis, it will be ordained by Elohim. This speaks to the third takeaway. Vis-a-vis, as it is the Father's will for his chosen elect to build an ark in these last days, those who are not, due to their unbelief, are not being led by his Spirit, and they are not being saved. My advice to you is to follow the direction of our Master. As he has let them alone, I suggest you let them alone and focus on saving yourself and building the ark that he has ordained. For although we do believe, we are not yet saved. Podcast 3, End Times 100, an intro to end times. Now, the key takeaways from this podcast are: 1, many who have been called will not be chosen. 2, the people of Elohim, past and present, have persistently been destroyed due to their lack of knowledge. And 3, understanding end times begins with preparing your heart and your mind to receive the truth. For the first key takeaway, we know that many who have been called will not be chosen, quite simply because our loving Master makes this declaration on 2 occasions. See Matthew 20:16 and Matthew 22:14. Now, the million-dollar question is simply why? Why will a small minority be chosen when so many have been called? This speaks to the second key takeaway. It is because they lack knowledge. This is why they will not be saved. For where there is no knowledge, there can be no preparation. And as I have often said, where there is no preparation, there can be no salvation. Likewise, salvation is predicated upon the renewal of our minds and the purification of our hearts. Therefore, the first step we must take in receiving the truth concerning these last days is preparing our hearts and our minds. And this is the final key takeaway from this lesson. Podcast 4, End Times 101, the basics. Now, there are 3 key takeaways from this lesson. 1, the model of the creative week is the baseline of end times. 2, time in the spiritual sphere is not the same as time on the earth. And 3, these last days will be highlighted by false prophets leading many astray. For the first key takeaway, the timeline below reveals the timing of the end times by providing a detailed view of the 6th creative week. So here you see the 6th creative week, i.e., the age of man, with 7 creative days that are 1,000 years in duration. And the beginning of the end times starts near the center of the 6th creative week. Now, a creative week is equated to 7,000 years on earth. It is composed of 7 creative days, and each day consists of 1,000 years. Again, the timeline below shows the 7 creative weeks, which make up time from the beginning of creation, as is recorded in Genesis 1:3, until the end. So you've got week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the Jubilee and the end of time. And here we are, creative week 6, the age of man. Now, this time reality evolves from the time disparity between the spiritual sphere and the physical earth. To wit, 1,000 years on the earth is equated to 1 day in the spirit dimension. Psalm 94 is revealing, for 1,000 years in your eyes are like yesterday that has passed, or like a watch in the night. 2 Peter 3:8, but beloved ones, let not this one matter be hidden from you, that with Yahuwah 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. Now, Satan understands this time disparity, for he is a spiritual being, yet he has fallen to the earth. And as he has fallen, he is concentrating his energies on causing men and women to fall with him. And one of the primary deceptions he is using is the deception of time. This speaks to the third takeaway. That is, he has built an army of false prophets, and one of their primary aims is to deceive those who have been called concerning the times we are living in. And although these deceivers are leading many astray, we have received the truth, and upon the truth we will stay. Podcast 5, End Times 102, the next level. Now, the 3 key takeaways from this podcast are: 1, the end times and the last days are not the same. They are 2 different spiritual models. 2, there are 3 major end times milestones, and the last days correspond to these milestones. 3, as in the days of Noah, the masses will perish because they do not know the time. Now, per the first takeaway, the timeline below reveals the end times began more than 2,000 years ago. They represent the second half of the 6th creative week. Here you see the 6th creative week below, and the beginning of the end times right here towards the second half. Now, there are 3 major end times milestones: the destruction of Jerusalem, the second coming of Yahushua Mashiach, and the end of the world. And here you see in orange the three major end times milestones happening after the beginning of the end times. Now, the last days represent the years leading up to the three major end times milestones. Per the timeline below, there are three instances of the last days, and we are living in the second instance. So here you see the first milestone, the destruction of Jerusalem, and there were last days with that destruction. And here you have the second coming of Yahushua Mashiach, and we are living in these last days. And lastly, you have the end of the world and the last days associated with that milestone. Now, this revelation is a focal component of the time mystery. This is why the masses are not privy to it, for it is not given to them to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. These are reserved for the children of Elohim. They are reserved for the chosen elect. This speaks to the third takeaway, namely, the masses will perish because they are blind to the times and seasons. Alas, they are as those who perished with the flood. They are overcome with the cares of this life, and that day will come upon them unawares. Luke 21, 34 through 36. And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be weighed down by gluttony and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you unawares. For it shall come as a snare on all those dwelling on the face of all the earth. Watch then at all times, and pray that you be counted worthy to escape all this about to take place, and to stand before the Son of Adam. Podcast 6, End Times 104, Building Blocks of Prophecy. Now, the three key takeaways from this podcast are: 1, the word of prophecy is structured in a series of building blocks. 2, there is great danger in incorporating any degree of error into your belief system. And 3, if we fail to walk in truth, it will be the downfall of our spiritual lives. Now, per the first takeaway, we came to see how the prophetic word is a complex puzzle that can only be solved by utilizing the correct pieces and ensuring each piece is in the correct place. Enter the building blocks of prophecy. By definition, the building blocks of prophecy is a spiritual order which reveals the prophetic word is established upon data points that are perfectly structured to where each line and each precept supports the other, providing the only factual accounting of prophecy and time. Herein lies the source of the power and the crux of the problem. The building blocks of prophecy represent a spiritual constant, a truth that will always emit two realities. I advise you to consider them faithfully. Now, on the one hand, the building blocks of prophecy can be used to ascertain every line of the prophetic word. Herein lies the power. On the other hand, the insertion of any error into this model compromises the entire model. Herein lies the problem. Specifically, if at least one of the building blocks of prophecy is not in order, this fault will not only lead to error, it will lead to compounded error. That is, error upon error, as opposed to line upon line. Moreover, as one error will always lead to additional error, the impact of a single error will never be limited to that error. Quite the contrary. All it takes is one error to compromise your understanding of any subject matter. For one error has the power to subject you to thousands more. On this wise, we understand that an error is like unto a spiritual virus that not only infects your knowledge, it will eventually infect and compromise every other facet of your spiritual being. This leads to the third takeaway and the vast importance of walking in truth. To wit, truth is equated to light, and light will always expose the error by eliminating darkness. And in the process, it will kill every spiritual virus. Alas, those who do not appreciate this reality are not only in poor spiritual health, regrettably, they are dying a slow spiritual death. Thus, we conclude, if you are not careful, one error could be the downfall of your spiritual life. Podcast 7, End Times 110, Times and Seasons. Now, the key takeaways from this podcast are: 1, times and seasons are the chief cornerstone of the end times. 2, purpose, times, and seasons are the 3 primary requirements of every prophecy. And 3, there are 7 primary seasons in these last days. For the first takeaway, we understand that time is the most pervasive factor of prophecy. This should be clear for 2 reasons. 1, the prophetic wheel is established upon a scale of time. And 2 of the 3 primary requirements on prophecy are related to time, i.e., times and seasons. By definition, times and seasons constitute a spiritual order which reveals every event, past, present, and future, has a specific time in which Elohim has ordained it to occur. These times are depicted by a corresponding season, and each season is depicted by correlating signs. This definition reveals why the chosen elect are not ignorant of the times or the seasons. It is because we have the Spirit, which empowers us to discern the signs revealing the times and seasons we are living in. Not only this, but we also understand the purpose behind every word of prophecy. This speaks to the second takeaway, which establishes purpose as the fundamental requirement for understanding end times. To wit, if there is no purpose, the event in question cannot possibly be the Father's will. Here lies the inflection and the problem. Vis-a-vis, because the masses do not follow the spiritual model of purpose, they have created an alternate reality defined by a myriad of events that A, have no association with prophecy, or B, they contradict the model of times and seasons. Understanding this, the Father directed me to establish and illustrate the times and seasons of these last days in the timeline below. This speaks to the final takeaway and the focus of this end time series. Vis-a-vis, there are 7 primary seasons in these last days. And as understanding these 7 seasons is the primary key to navigating these last days, the remainder of this end time series will be centered on a detailed analysis of these 7 seasons and the steps we must take to survive them. Podcast 8, End Times 120, The Spirit of Endurance. Now, the key takeaways from this podcast are: 1, you must be led by the Spirit to successfully navigate these last days. 2, you must possess a comprehensive view of the end times if you are to achieve understanding. And 3, we all have a window of opportunity to be saved. For the first takeaway, the best illustration of these last days is a time maze. And thus, to survive, you need to know where the Father wants you physically and spiritually. And you need to know how much time you have to get there. Then again, you must always remember this: there will only be a few safe spaces left in the earth during the Great Confiscation, i.e., the time of the Great Distress, which will occur between seasons 3 and season 5. Here you see season 3, the setting of the nations, and then season 5, the day of Yahuwah. Between these 3 seasons, you have the time of the Great Distress. Likewise, there are 3 factors which will make relocating to these safe spaces extremely difficult. 1, these safe spaces will not appear safe to the natural eye. 2, relocation must occur at the appointed time. And 3, the only saving direction is forward, and there will be no turning back. This is precisely why you must be led by the Spirit, for without Him, the sum of these 3 factors will deter you, and you will not flee. Rather, you will stay in a place that appears safe to the natural eye, and yet Elohim has marked it for destruction. This is why you must have a comprehensive view of the end times, i.e., the second key takeaway. In doing so, you will clearly see the high level and detailed views of these last days. You will also see your window of opportunity as it slowly but surely is closing. For once the sealing of the set apart ones has ended, the day of salvation will have come and gone. And this is the final takeaway. And thus, I leave you with a familiar passage from Hebrews. Hebrews 3:15-19 is revealing. While it is said, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who, having heard, rebelled? Was it not all who came out of Mitzrayim, led by Moshe? And with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter into his rest, but to those who did not obey?" So we see then that they were unable to enter in because of unbelief. Now, here is the final word. The most critical message you must receive is: do not doubt, only believe. You've heard me use the phrase, "as in the days of Noah," many times throughout the 100 level courses in this End Time series. And I will do so again on this final occasion by asking you to consider the primary difference between Noah and his family, i.e., those who survived being taken, and the rest of the world who died, being left behind. Decisively, those who survived and were taken believed in something they could not prove physically, but they were convicted in the spirit, for they heard the word of Elohim, and they moved with fear and built an ark. And this is the same thing we are doing in this day. On the other hand, those who died, those who were not spiritually qualified to persist beyond the flood, did not believe. And in the course of time, their fates were sealed. They would surely die. They would perish with the flood. It was simply a matter of time. Alas, the same scene will be manifested in these last days. Those who do not believe the end is upon us are being marked for death. And once the displeasure fully sets in, the wrath of Elohim will destroy them. He will take them all away. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today and ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. Remember, where there is no conviction, there can be no faith. And without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Next, if the Spirit is leading you and you have not signed up for our mailing list, you can go to www.transformationbytruth.com to sign up today. We'll alert you as soon as podcasts are posted, and we'll share our presentations, notes, and other materials at no cost. It is for your edification. And most importantly, you will be connected to me and those who have joined themselves to this ministry as we prophesy and align current events with the prophetic word. These discussions are taking place outside of this podcast ministry. Therefore, if the Spirit is leading you, and only if the Spirit is leading you, I encourage you to come and see. You will be in good spiritual company. Lastly, if you have any questions, please submit them via our contact form on our website. If you have any comments, please share those on the video page for this podcast, also on our website. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 198, a summary of the End Times Level 1, Part 1. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 199, a summary of the End Times Level 1, Part 2. I will post this podcast on Monday, June 26, 2023. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.